Now, we've already spoken about overhand shuffle controls on this channel, so it wouldn't be fair unless we talk about the primary one, or the main one that people think about when we're talking about an overhand shuffle control. I'm talking about the Mahatma Control, otherwise known as the Mahatma Pass Substitute. And mainly it's the main one that people think of, mainly because it's what people first learn when we're talking about overhand shuffle controls. And you can't really blame them because, I mean, it's easy, it's simple, but it's also very much so reliable. So it's a lot of things that I think a lot of people tend to like in a simple or in a just a top control in general. So let's begin with the name. Mahatma. Where did it come from? Now, the word itself does come from a more, I guess, spiritual background, more religious background. So in general, Mahatma just means like sort of a revered person or a person of great wisdom. This word was then borrowed from Magic magazine. So of course I'm talking about Mahatma from 1895 to 1906 by George Little. So that was a series of magazines, periodicals, I guess we would call them that. The move itself was published in volume 5, number 2, back in 1901 by Hal Merton, otherwise known as Walter G. Peterkin. So that is where you can find the Mahatma Control, the original publication of the move. So it was actually published in an article where he actually describes 3 different controls, 3 different pass substitutes. He actually calls them 3 new passes. Of course, nowadays we just call them controls, but back then, passes would just sort of refer to everything because you would actually just pass one card from the center to maybe the top or to the bottom. So nowadays we have the specialized term controls, but back then everything was just a pass, right? But essentially, Hal Merton describes 3 different controls. The third one was, of course, the Mahatma Control, but there's actually two very interesting claims that Hal Merton actually makes in the article. So, quote, "I can without fear of contradiction that the first 2 are of my own invention, and that all 3 are absolutely new to the profession and have never appeared before in print." Unquote. So even though this is actually a rather short passage, it's actually quite important for the history of the Mahatma Control. So, first point, only the first 2 belong to Hal Merton. So that doesn't actually include the Mahatma Control because he says that the first 2, only the first 2, are of his own invention, which means that excludes the Mahatma Control. Point number 2 is that all 3 have never appeared in print up until the Mahatma issue, right? So this means that Hal Merton doesn't actually lay claim to the Mahatma Control. Who does? We don't really know. And as far as we know, much like Hal Merton claims, we haven't actually been able to find any sources that predates Mahatma. So we're kind of at a dead end, hence why this move is actually called the Mahatma Control or the Mahatma Pass Substitute, because we don't really have any other name associated with this move, just the source of its publication. And again, Hal Merton does not lay claim to this move, so really, we're kind of just naming it after where it's found. And we first see that the move is actually named after the publication in Victor Ferrelli's Card Magic Part 1 back in 1933. And of course, that was under the chapter of substitutes for the pass, and it was under the first section, Mahatma Substitutes. So yeah, you can sort of see where we sort of get the name Mahatma Control now, even though it's just an unnamed pass in the original publication. And of course, there were 3 moves described in Victor Ferrelli's book. So all 3 of those are basically just variations of the Mahatma Control that we know nowadays. And of course, ever since then, it just became sort of very, very immensely popular, right? It was published in so many different sources. The Mahatma Control can be found in pretty much every basic magic book nowadays, right? You can find it in Encyclopedia of Card Tricks, right, by G. Newgard, and Frederick Browie. You can of course find in Greater Magic as well. So lots of different sources have the Mahatma Control, but Mahatma was where this source actually originates from, and Victor Ferrelli's Card Magic was where you start seeing it being called the Mahatma Control or the Mahatma Pass. Okay, so yeah, that is the general history behind the Mahatma Control. So to perform the Mahatma Control, you pretty much only need to know two things. One is the overhand shuffle and how to get into it seamlessly. So just knowing how to do this, or just knowing how to do this, right? Simple. The second thing is knowing how to collapse a pinky break into a step. So either this, or more traditionally, this, right? So with those two things, you should be able to do the control with no issue whatsoever. And of course, if you don't know how to do either of those things, of course, you can just look at the info cards where there will be videos describing these two things in more detail. But we will pretty much just briefly describe those as we go on with the Mahatma Control. The original Mahatma Control was actually used as a control to the top. You're going to have a card selected with your preferred method and return somewhere near the bottom of the deck, right? So let's just use a more recognizable card, in which case we are going to use, let's just use the Queen of Hearts, because the aces don't really exist in this deck. So the Queen of Hearts is going to be our main card over here, okay? The Queen of Hearts. So you're actually going to have it returned to near the bottom of the deck. So I think most sources actually describe returning this card about 15 to 20 cards from the bottom of the deck. So it's around here. And the reason why you actually want it to be returned near the bottom of the deck is so then the first chop of the overhand shuffle looks less awkward. Because the higher up that this selection is in the deck, the more cards there will be for the first chop. So if I'm doing it from, if I'm returning the selection closer to the top, so pretend there's only 20 cards on top of the selection, if I do this move, this looks very awkward. Now I only have like 10 cards to shuffle off, and that doesn't make it look nice, right? So I want this card to be lower in the deck, so then when I actually do the move, I have a lot more cards to shuffle off, okay? So I want this card to be lower in the deck, okay? So once you have this card returned to the bottom, to near the bottom deck, you're gonna close up the deck, square everything up, and we're going to obtain a pinky break above of the selection over here. So my Queen of Hearts is going to be here, okay? So I have a pinky break above of my selection, and now from there, I'm actually going to collapse this pinky break into a step, okay? So I'm actually just gonna curl in my thumb underneath of the deck. I'm just gonna kick it upwards like so, okay? And what this does is that this packet over here actually rides on top of my pinky, while this packet over here sinks down below of my pinky, right? So this does this. So now this packet is actually supported by my pinky over here, and I have a step formed. So that's briefly how you actually collapse a pinky break into a step, right? You just kick it upwards like so, and then we have a step, just like so. And it's gonna be exactly at the selection, just like so, okay? So now that we have that, what we're actually gonna do is, our right hand is gonna come over, and you'll notice that now the deck is actually basically in an overhand shuffle position with a step. So my right hand's gonna come over, and it's actually just gonna grip the packet that is above of the step. So it's just gonna come over, grip everything above of the step. So now we basically have two entities. We have the packet in our left hand, and we have the packet in our right hand over here, okay? So these two basically operate independently, okay? Now using your left thumb, it's going to reach over and you're going to execute the first chop. But it's mainly actually going to be an imitation chop. We're not really going to like peel off one thing because this packet is already in our left hand, right? So in reality, you're really just letting this packet fall loose as your right hand raises this packet over here. And this automatically causes this packet to flop there and the selection to go to the top, right? So at this point, you're basically done the control, right? But there's actually a couple of subtleties with the first chop, right? So you can let it just fall loose, that's fine. But what I actually like to do is I'd like to apply a bit of pressure with my thumb on maybe the top card like so. So then I get that noise. I get that oscillatory scrape, because then you can tell that it's literally a shuffle. Because if I just did a flop, right? If I just did a flop, I wouldn't get much of a noise, right? But if you actually notice a normal overhand shuffle, it's actually quite loud. So I want that scrape. I want this to have a bit of pressure. So then we get that oscillatory, audible scrape, right? Just to sell the fact that it is an actual chop. So it's a very, very small thing, but I think that the oscillatory illusion of this one aspect of the move is extremely important, because you don't realize it, but humans have very, very good ears as well. So if I want to sell this illusion, even though I'm not directly looking up at the deck, I want to apply a bit of pressure with my left thumb, and then I want this scrape. Okay, so even though it's just me lifting up my right hand, I want my thumb there, apply a bit of pressure, and scrape. So that's just a very, very small thing, but I think it helps immensely. Okay, and of course, again, this automatically puts the selection on top. And from there, you can just shuffle the cards on top of the deck, on top of the pack in your left hand, normally, and then we're done. Our selection is now on top of the deck. And so yeah, that is just the Mahatma Control. Very, very simple again, but again, I do like the audible aspect of the Mahatma Control in this instance. Now for people who already know the move, they might actually notice a couple of key differences with my handling. One is that I actually delay when you peel off the bottom packet. So when I actually see certain people do this move, I actually see them actually lift up the deck from a dealer's grip, and then they prop this lower packet into an overhand shuffle position, and then they shuffle everything else on top. But then really, it doesn't look right. It looks very, very bizarre, because then it just looks like this. That doesn't look like a normal overhand shuffle. Whereas, if you delay doing this shuffle, if you prop it up, and then you execute the overhand shuffle with the added thumb motion, it looks a lot more like a legit overhand shuffle. Right? It doesn't look like you're just cutting off the deck, flipping this packet over, and then shuffling on top. Now, this looks like an actual overhand shuffle with the oscillatory audible aspect, right? So that's why I actually delay grabbing this packet and then doing the overhand shuffle, okay? The second thing is that, well, actually let the packet with the selection remain separate from the top, and I just let it flop over, right? So I let this packet remain separate and just grab this packet over here. And the reason why I actually do that is that if I actually grab the entire deck like so, and then I use my left thumb to peel off this packet, that's a lot of friction. And it's a lot of unnecessary friction to where the tip of my thumb might actually peel off an additional card on top, which means that now this card is no longer controlled to the top. It's now second from top, which is an issue. So I want this card to actually remain separate, and then I just let it flop. But I still apply a bit of pressure just for that scrape, okay? And then there we go. we have our selection on top. So that's why there are two main key differences, which is I delay the overhand shuffle a bit, and then I also let the packet flop a bit as well. So yeah, I just thought it'd be interesting to explain my reasoning behind why certain things are this way just in this handling. So yeah. Now in Victor Ferrelli's book, Ferrelli's Card Magic Part 1, the first Mahatma substitute, as he called them, is described as a bottom control. The book doesn't really give us a lot to work with, so I'll pretty much need to improvise a bit around of it. So we're actually going to have a card selected and then return to the center of the deck, but we're actually going to do the opposite of the normal Mahatma control. We're going to have the card returned near the top of the deck right now, okay? So maybe 15 to 20 cards above of the selection, okay? And then we're actually going to get a pinky break below of the selection, right? So we're going to have a card selected, and then we're going to have a pinky break below the selection over here, right? And this is where the description of the move gets a bit iffy. So quote, undercut at the break, held by the little finger, and in a casual manner, shuffle off onto the packet in the left hand. The selected card is now at the bottom of the pack, unquote. And that's the description of the move, which is pretty vague, so you can understand why I'm like, huh, right? So I'm gonna have to do a little bit of creative interpretation. So, because if you understand the description, it says undercut. This is an undercut, but that doesn't make much sense in the context of this control, right? So again, I'm gonna have to improvise a bit. So what I'm gonna do is I'm actually gonna tilt my left hand upwards, so my middle ring and pinky finger will be tilted upwards, pointed up to the sky. My right hand then comes over and grips the deck in overhand shuffle position, like so. So this actually transfers this pinky break into a thumb break with my right hand, just like so. So my left thumb actually reaches over at this thumb break and it's just going to cut at it, right? It's just going to go cut. And that's basically the first chop of the overhand shuffle, right? It just reaches over, cuts at it, and then we just continue to shuffle off the cards normally, like so, on top of the packet that's already in our left hand. And of course, that causes our selection to go to the bottom of the deck. And of course, that's how you actually use the Mahatma control as a bottom control. It's again, a different approach, but it's kind of hard to work around such a vague description. But that's how Victor Ferrelli uses this move as a bottom control. So if you want to learn more about the Mahatma control, there's of course a couple of resources that you can look at. One, you can look at The Expert of the Card Table by S.W. Ertnays, Card Manipulations by G. Newgard, Hugard's Magic Monthly by G. Newgard, of course, Best of Friends Volume 3 by Harry Lorraine, Talk About Tricks by Joshua J. And of course, if you want to look at Ben Earl's handling, which is different, right? You can of course look at The Family by Ben Earl / Studio 52. It's a subscription service, so it might not be accessible to everyone, but I do highly recommend it because Ben Earl's magic nowadays is very, very, I guess a lot of people actually look at Ben Earl's magic as being very much so, there we go, as the standard for magic nowadays because it's simple, it's direct, but it's also powerful. So if you are interested in a lot of his work, you can look at the Family by Studio 52. Yeah, this is just the bare bones of the Mahatma control with a bit of additional reasoning behind my certain actions. So yeah, have fun with your research. And that was the Mahatma control. It's, again, like I said, a very, very simple move, but very efficient and very, very easy. There's really not much else you can ask for in a control, or just a move in general, right? There is something that I didn't tell in the description, so we're gonna say this is a final thoughts thing, but again, you can delay the move, right? We're talking about Roger Klaus's ideas of a half move. So if we're actually looking at the Mahatma Control as just maybe a half move, right? If you're talking, if you're doing anything, once you have your pinky break over here, you can kick it up, you can talk, you can relax, you can do whatever, and then when you're ready, you can grip the upper, the packet above of the step, and then you can execute the move, right? So you can delay everything, you can do whatever, and it's good again to just take a step back and just sort of relax, right? You don't have to do every move in quick succession, and that's the whole point of Roger Klaus's half moves. So you can of course treat the Mahatma Control as multiple different blocks. Selection, close, talk a bit, right? Kick it up, talk a bit more, have the deck all messy like so, grip, and then overhand shuffle. Right, so that's just another approach to the Mahatma Control, which I didn't really talk about in the explanation section, but of course, feel free to break it up. Feel free to break up every single one of your moves. Maybe I'll make a video on the half moves, on half moves in general, but again, it's just nice to have a simple move that you can still break up in different sections, and that's what makes Magic so very much so interesting. And so yeah, hope you guys enjoyed the Mahatma Control. Again, very simple, and I actually don't really use the Mahatma Control. Well, that's mainly because I actually don't really control cards to the top. I actually find that controlling cards to the bottom is a lot more advantageous in my instance. But again, it's a matter of personal preference. I just personally prefer to control cards to the bottom because then we have an entire block sort of hiding everything. And of course I can then bottom palm the cards, which means that I have additional cover for everything because I have the deck hiding everything, right? So that's just an additional thing. But yeah, if you're looking for a top control, I say that really the Mahatma Control is right up there amongst the best for simplicity and for a lot of things. It may not be the most technically satisfying, but it still is something that I very much so enjoy. And so yeah, stay safe, stay healthy, and hope to see you guys next time with another fun move or Magic in general, right? So yeah.